You've done a lot of interviews over your extensive career, and today I'm going to try to concentrate on Paul.
Sure.
However, I'm sure it'll drag in a lot of collateral damage. Uh, just to get started, what would you say is the cliff notes on Bob Heil?
Whoa. I don't know if I can answer that.
It could be a long, drawn out question. Um,
Yeah.
well, let's just go on and we'll probably cover it here. Did you have correspondence with Paul, written correspondence with him?
No. But it's always the telephone.
Okay, so I will not look for a correspondence file.
I don't think so. I think there was some with Bob Mears, but I don't think there was anything directly with Paul because I don't have anything. I was just going through all these because I'm moving a bunch of stuff since we moved down here, and I just have tons of paper, thousands of them actually, and I'm throwing out lots of things that don't mean anything, but saving a few. And if I would see anything from Paul, I would have kept it.
Okay. Well, in this first meeting with Paul, I understand that he called you. Can you describe that call?
Yeah, I describe it a lot in many of my things that I do. I received this call from I picked up the phone and they said that you, Heil? And I said, yes, sir. Who's this? That's your Klipsch here. And I'm going to myself, this is God on the other end of this phone. I said, yes, sir. What can I do for you? And I'll never forget. He said, you got a cornfield I can come and crash in? And I said, I'm sorry. Damn it. You don't have an airport in that little town you live in, probably. You got an airport. I can come fly and see you. I said, yes, sir, about 8 miles south at Sparta. Well, I want to come and see you. You're the guy that's got that big PA that you've been running around with. And I said, yes, sir. I want to come and see it. And so he did. And I had a 1969 or 70 Corvette, and I drove that yellow Corvette down to Sparta, picked him up, and we spent all day together, and it was very, very rewarding because all day long, he was much taller. He was right here all day. And when I look back on it, Jim, it was like he wasn't cutting me down. He didn't understand probably what all the craziness we were doing because we didn't know what we were doing, but we were doing it. And he would say, well, why you do that? Well, why did you do this? Well, how come you did this? And as I'd answer these questions, he wouldn't come back with, well, that's not right. And when I look back on that whole thing, it would be a Paul Klipsch, it would be his persona to come and say, well, that's stupid or this. He didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I
He was
just,
probably learning from you.
well, I think he was seeing things he never saw. I know he didn't see this
He
before.
had never
We're
considered.
sitting in front of thousands of watts of McIntosh amps and all of that. And oh my gosh, it was just outrageous. But he
Now,
was very, very, uh, very smooth and solid. And that wasn't what you know about when you think about Paul Klipsch. Because if he didn't see anything he didn't like, but he'd let you know.
mm-hmm.
And then he put me and my compatriot, Ed Drone, who was kind of my sidekick, put it in the plane and flew back down to Hope. And the next day, and I say this, and it's not a joke, I'm not saying it ridiculously, it's not funny. It was like a drunk meeting Jesus. Those 2 days spent with Paul Klipsch was amazing in my life
And your
because I
associate
learned so much.
and your associate went with you.
Yes,
So,
Ed Drone.
so both of you went down there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Did
Yep.
Paul say how he heard about your system?
No, I don't. That's the important part. But we were all over the audio news because we had done the Grateful Dead, got them out of a big problem, and then the Who were in a huge amount of trouble, and we hit the front page of Billboard, and it was pretty. It was pretty well defined in the industry about this little music shop in Marissa, Illinois, that had been changing the direction of live sound. And I think that probably would be part of it. And I don't think MERS would be outside of that. I think Bob had a lot to do with it too,
Yeah.
because he was more in tune with that side of the industry, I do believe.
Absolutely. I feel confident he is the one that put a bug in Paul's ear.
One thing that I did learn, I called Paul, Ed. I talk to Ed quite often. He's a ham radio buddy of mine. I talked to him last week, and I told him we were going to be talking. And Ed plays in a bluegrass group. He still does, and the Travelers. And they were playing in some kind of a bluegrass deal down in Arkansas. And Bob came several times to hear them play. So Ed really was closer to Bob than I was, I think, in that side of the thing. And I bet you that's how it all happened.
What time of the year and what year was it?
Oh boy. I don't know that I could answer that. I've thought about that a lot. And I think it would have been like 71, maybe 72, right in there. Ed might be able to answer that for us too.
Was it summer, winter, spring, fall?
Oh, it had to be in summer. Yeah, because when we got down to Hope, I don't know why I didn't have a camera, but a lot of us didn't carry cameras in those days. There's many things I wish I would have had a picture of. I remember vividly, and Ed recalled this when I talked to him the other day. He says, yeah, remember, we got down there, and old Paul stacked a couple of La Scalas. Now, this was out in front of his little white lab, out in the yard, and they ran a cable back, and I think Bob was doing all that, and they were playing, I think, some of the Who stuff through this thing. And I mean to tell you, it was loud, just these two La Scalas. And I mean, and I remember vividly, here is Paul Klipsch, shirt and tie, no suit coat, and he's running. And he had a sound pressure meter with him. And he run about a football field away and making all these measurements, because Bob said, he came to me and he said, this is the first time that the old guy has ever heard anything this loud, and he doesn't ever listen to rock and roll. So he said, you guys are really waking him up today. And I'll never forget that was the first time Paul Klipsch had heard anything that loud and that crazy. And that was something to remember. But he was out running around. So where I'm going with this is it had to be summer. It wasn't in the winter, I can guarantee you.
I have heard on various interviews of you that this system was described as 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 watts. What?
Yeah, well, we had so many different systems. Most of the time it was a 20,000 watt system, but see, we could couple them all together. If we'd end up somewhere where both systems would be available, and we were just playing. We were just having fun. We just hook it all up and let it go.
Yeah.
But the main system was around 20,000 watts, and it was all McIntosh power. At one point, we started bringing Crown into the situation. Now, that's another interesting story about that. But the main system we had was around 20 thou, and then we had these other supplemental system, and they were for other bands that we would be out with.
Well, when Paul came to Marissa, you demonstrated the system, I'm sure.
No, we really didn't. We didn't have it hooked up. We had a one stack there in the building, but we never hooked the whole thing up, because that's quite a thing to to do, and it was big and took up a lot of space. So no, we he never really heard that big system. He heard a couple pieces of it, but that was it.
Okay. You mentioned McIntosh. Paul was a big fan of McIntosh, but you were already using McIntosh when you met him, correct?
Yeah, I had those. What was it, 3500s? I don't know how many of those we had. They were amazing amplifiers. Here's one side of that system that we would have had.
Right.
That's one side.
Right.
And then we had all the monitors and backfills because we had a lot of stuff back in the back. But he got to see some of that stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, I called Gordon Gow and we bought a bunch of McIntosh over the years.
Okay. We have many letters to Gordon Gow in the file.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple of things in your background that occurs to me could have put you in good favor with him. One of them is the organ playing. Did you guys discuss the organ at all?
No, I was extremely sad when I started reading this stuff about the organ, because while he came to Marissa, I should have took him to the Fox. We should have fired up that Wurlitzer. I had no idea that he was so involved and interested in the organ. That I could have took him home and played him a couple of my electronic things I had, but we never talked about it. And you know what? I don't. Well, I do these days, but back in those days, most of the people I dealt with, I never mentioned it. They never knew that I played.
Right.
It was a whole little part of my life. And the reason I did it is it's theater organ music. It wasn't anything like the rocker.
Right.
So I didn't think they would be interested in it. Now, the only time I did is when we'd work with Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, and and some of those guys, and I'd help get their organ and fixed up and going and help them out.
Right.
A little hook up different so it was better, that kind of thing.
The other one was ham radio. Did you all discuss that at all?
A little bit, but not to any great extent.
Okay, well, I know Paul's thesis at Stanford was on radio, so he was he came from radio.
Right.
I noticed that some of the speakers you were using, came out of a theater or something. They were old RCA bathtubs and Altec stuff, and so apparently you were pretty much weaned on that and understood the efficiency angle.
Yeah, well, you see that how this all started. I was the organist at the Fox Theater for, I don't know, 12, 15 years, still play there occasionally. And I'd been playing there. I started when I was 15 as a substitute organist. Dan Can was the organist, and he was my teacher. I was his only student. And, let's see, it would have been, we got to fast forward because I went through that career, and it would have been about 67. I quit playing because I was playing 6 nights a week. I had a pipe organ in a restaurant in St. Louis, and I was at a Holiday Inn, believe it or not. It was the largest Holiday Inn in the chain, and the restaurant there was a 4-star restaurant, Schneidhorst. There were 4 or 5 of them in St. Louis. It was a big name in the restaurant, but I had a pipe organ in that restaurant, and people came from all over America to come and hear that thing that I had built. But that was 62 through about 65. But I quit playing in 66. I just got tired of 4 hours a night and all those years. So I came back to Marissa. Of course, I'd been living there, driving back and forth. And I opened this little music shop. I was going to teach organ and piano. And it was 2,000 people in this town.
Right.
I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And the first thing you know, here comes these guys would come in with their guitar amps. I had never seen a guitar amp. I was entrenched. I'm one of these guys that's so focused. I didn't hardly know who these rock artists were, the Beatles and all this, because I was listening to Jesse Crawford and George Wright and Buddy Cole and all the organists. Well, these kids started coming into my music shop and they said, "It's a music shop, right?" "Yeah." "Well, I got this amplifier and it's broke." Well, it was a Fender and it had a pair of 6L6s and a 5U4. It's the same thing that's in the modulator of that transmitter behind me. That was my first transmitter and I still have it. And I still have it on the air. I was on the air about an hour ago with it.
Great.
And most all the stuff you see behind me came from the 60s, late 50s and 60s. I've had it all these years, and everything works. But anyway,
Well, that's
I could fix this amp.
trait that you have in common with Paul Klipsch. He kept everything.
Well, these kids brought these amps in, and the finals were blown in them. So I had a pair of 6L6s, and the screen resistor was going to be blown. I knew that if that goes down, and a 5U4. And about 20 minutes later, these guys were going. Well, they went nuts because the word got out that there's this guy in Marissa that can fix your amps. And all of a sudden, here comes a wrath of young kids, we're talking high school kids, that turned out to be REO Speedwagon, Michael McDonald, Danny Fogelberger, The Guild, da-di-da-di-da-di-da. And that's how I got started in this. And then I got a Hammond organ franchise. I can't believe I did, but I did. They didn't do their homework very well. We were still in the St. Louis market, but we were 50 miles out.
Yeah.
And I guess they looked at a map from Chicago and said, "Oh, he's okay." Well, not really, because I was competing with the St. Louis guys, but I didn't think about it then. But I look back on it and say, "Whoa!" I started renting Hammond organs to the promoters because these groups would come into town to Keele Auditorium, and they couldn't rent any Hammonds because the Steinway Hammond dealer, oh my, you know how that goes. They wouldn't even let these guys with their hair down to here and didn't take a bath last week. They wouldn't let them in their store. Well, I did, and I was selling Hammond organs like crazy and then renting them. That is the key. That's what changed the whole rock and roll sound world, because I'm seeing these little bitty columns to fill 20,000 seats. You got to be kidding. That's what they had. Little All-Tech mixer,
Yeah.
a little green mixer with 4 inputs on it, and that was it. Well, I started playing around with stuff, and Ed Drone was one of my high school chums and ham radio buddy, and he was really into audio. I never was really into audio. I was into RF, and I never really played much, but he did. He had Crown tape recorders and all that stuff. Well, one day in '67, I'm driving by the Fox. Now, I hadn't been playing there in a couple of years. I'll go in and see my old buddy there, the stagehand. I go in, and there's George Bales at the back door. I said, "What are you doing with all this stuff?" It's sitting out in the alley. "Well, we're putting new speakers in." "Really? Well, what are you doing with these?" "Well, they're here for the trash company to pick up." "These speakers, you're going to throw them away?" "Yeah." I said, "Can I have them?" "Sure." So I went back to Marissa. Next day, got a truck, went up there and got 4 Olsen bins, 4 of them. And there were 4 or 6, I forget, All-Tech A4s, and the radio, the cellular horns, the whole bit. Well, you can imagine what I did and experimenting with all of this stuff. I mean, this is like putting a kid in a toy store, because I had never played with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where it all started. In that picture I showed you a minute ago, that is where those Olsen bins came from. I had another one. As I told you, we had various systems.
So did
The other
Paul-
one was of
Did Paul
the
Klipsch
A4s.
see those speakers when he was in Marissa?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Oh,
So
yeah.
That gave you some
Oh, yeah.
credibility.
Oh yeah, no question about that. And he was marveled with all of that we had all that stuff. And the excuse me, the Olsen bins really did wake me up because they were so efficient. And I remember I had JBL speakers in them, and he told me this the second day. He didn't tell me when we were there. That's why I say he didn't cut me down. He didn't say anything negative. And you would have thought, finding out who he was later, why he didn't, but he did in a very cool way. The next day, we were running like, oh man, just a couple of watts, and holy smokes, this thing was doing a 110 dB. You know this. You know the story with his stuff. It was so efficient, and then we got to talking about that. He said, "Well, kid, you need to look at those speakers because they're not loaded right. You got those W bins, you got all that Olsen stuff, you need to look at it." And then he guided me to some speakers that really did work. And we put his speakers in the Olsen bins, and they worked great, much better than the JBLs, because the JBLs weren't even close to being tuned to do that folded horn. Well, that's what started the whole thing with the dialogue with him and efficiency. That's what he taught me. As I told you, I learned so much that 2 days. And he would teach, he would talk about, you need to go back and look at the Bell Lab reports. And he started singling all these out. Dr. Fletcher, Dr. Munson, look at all of the studies they did about what the human ear can do, what we need to hear for articulation. I'd never heard those words before. and it's one of these things I tell the guys all the time, because I do a lot of lectures and I teach some in colleges. And as I say, articulation is golden, but nobody talks about it. And they don't even know what to do with equalization today. It's just some kind of a button you turn. Well, not really. And let's see here. I have a great love of what Paul taught me, because it made my career really fly after I got involved in learning about the Fletcher Munson curves. I just wrote another book, ham radio book, and ham radio operators have never seen this kind of stuff. They don't know what that's all about. And yet the Fletcher Munson curve, that whole chapter is about equalization and stuff, and what it takes to hear the difference from an F and an S and a P and a B. That was all learned from Paul. Was it learned that day? No. But he guided me. He pointed me in a direction, and I had to search out these papers, which I did. And that, along with the efficiency, loading the cabinets, stacking the cabinets, that was another thing that these guys, in fact, let's see, let me grab something else. I should have gotten this before. This was very important of what I learned that day out there with those La Scalas. Because here again, Ed and I didn't know what we were doing. We were just doing stuff. Here's a chapter that's totally devoted to what Paul taught me. This is in another book. This book I wrote about 76, 77. It's still in print. I still have guys use it and call for it, and it's so rudimentary. And these are the things I learned from Paul, and I learned them that very day out in that field in front of his building about stacking. And he proved it. He had his sound pressure meter there, and being able to couple the bass horns instead of just standing them up
around
there. Yeah, coupling. That was so important. And I couldn't believe what happened acoustically when you just stacked them right. And I wrote all kinds of paper, and we really woke the industry up with this little book. This book is just, and it's all stuff Most of it all learned from Paul in those 2 days, guiding this little dummy into what this science really was.
You've said several times that your ability to listen critically was largely influenced by your organ tuning work.
No question.
And
I was very,
I
I
wonder if
was
any of
very,
that is the same with Paul.
well, I was very blessed when I was 15 years old. Stan Can took me under his wing. I was playing in a little restaurant. I'm looking for something here. This is a cool picture. You guys see it. I was in this restaurant in a very small town, playing on the weekends, and a guy gave me a phone number. He said he came in and he enjoyed the music, and he said, "Boy, you ought to go get together with this guy. Here, call him." And I didn't know who it was. Well, it was Stan. When I called, Stan was a very famous person in St. Louis. He was on television every day with a little ladies show. Him and another gal, and he played the organ on it. And then he played the Fox. And I called him, and he said, "Well, I don't teach, but." He told my mom. My mom called. At the time I was 14 years old. Bring him up here. Let me listen to him. And he took me under his wing that day, and we started doing things. And I never could figure out quite what was going on for a while, but then I figured it out. He needed a substitute, and you can't just jump on one of these things. One of the reasons, especially at the Fox, the console is in a position where it's back out of phase from the pipe chambers, and you can't hear it. It's about usually it's about a second of delay, sometimes more. It's crazy. But I learned as a kid. There I was at 15 at the Fox. But where I learned to listen was Stan needed help. That organ hadn't been played in 20 years. And he taught me how. This was a late picture of that. But this is just one little episode of the chambers. Being able not to tune them, that's easy, getting them on octaves. Where it comes into being is the harmonic value. When you take like a brass trumpet or a clarinet or a flute pipe, when you play up and down the scale, you want C and D and E. The harmonics, they have to sound exactly alike. That is an art, and that is what this little kid was taught. And then I got with Martin Wick at the Wick Pipe Organ Company, and he also was, it was just absolutely golden to be able to spend those years playing around in those pipe organ chambers and learning how to listen. Little did I know how it was going to affect me later on, but I did learn how to listen, and it always from that pipe organ. And I would say that if Paul was involved and interested in pipe organs, he would know about the harmonic value of all these pipes and what it meant.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go back to the trip to Arkansas in the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that time he was flying a Travel Air airplane. Do you recall the brand, the type?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Were you riding co-pilot with him?
No, Ed was, because he even said to Ed, "Here, you want to fly it?" So Ed flew it for a little bit.
Well, we have several of his handmade slide rules that he used to calculate fuel air mixture and all that stuff. Did you see him using a little handmade slide rule during the flight?
No, but I bet Ed might have. I didn't. I don't remember that one.
Well, many of his passengers have come back with hair-raising tales of flying with Paul. Did he pretty much keep it between the lines?
Yes. Yeah, there was no funny business. Nope.
And
not that I recall.
It was just the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah was not part of it yet?
Oh, no. She wasn't in my life then. I was still single then.
Okay, and then
Let's see, wait a minute. No, that's right. I had, but that wife is gone.
did Paul fly you back to Marissa, I presume? Okay.
Yes. And
And
that's when we got out of the airplane on the tarmac in Sparta, Illinois at their airport. And he said, "Come here, young man, stick your hand out." So I stuck my hand out and he said, "Now look, you're going to need this throughout your life and don't be afraid to use it."
the bullshit button.
Gave me the button.
Well, when you were in Hope, you said you stayed 2 days. Where did you spend the night there?
Well, that was interesting because Ed, I recalled we stayed at his house, but Ed thought we might have stayed at a hotel, and I can't believe I don't remember that. Because I know he got up at like 6 in the morning and ran a mile or two, and I didn't.
Yeah, I was going to ask
But I
if,
remember-
if you went jogging with him.
No. But I remember Belle.
Now, tell me a little about Belle.
I just remember she was a sweet little lady and was very, very gracious to us. And I liked tea, and she fixed some hot tea for me. Other than that, we didn't see her much.
Okay.
We took off and headed to the plant.
So, but you did go to their home.
Mm-hmm.
And did he have his model trains running?
Well, I knew they were there. He didn't run them for me, but they were there. Yeah.
Did he play you some tape recordings?
No, we didn't do much there. We were headed out and did all that out at the plant.
Did he offer you a drink?
Nope.
And you don't drink?
Because, nope. But there again, Belle had fixed some hot tea for us.
I would imagine that in your business, you were one of the first designated drivers.
I was. I've never tasted beer or smoked a cigarette ever.
Wow.
And I think, well, I'm almost positive. Well, none of my family did, but when I was playing in that restaurant when I was 14 years old, man, I would come home and my eyes would burn so much I'd have to put washcloths on them.
Oh.
And I was 14 years old, and you'd see these guys come in and sit at the bar on a Friday night, and they'd blow $100 like nothing. And I'm going, whoa, I could buy a lot of stuff for $100. And it made a huge impact on me at the money these guys are wasting. And then they'd go out in the parking lot and barf it all up. It didn't make sense to me. And I think that's one of the big deals. And plus, none of the people I ran around with drank. So, okay. And then I hated smoke. I still today, if I pull up at a stop sign in a car and there's somebody next door smoking, you're not going to believe this. I can smell that smoke. It drives me bananas. and it just, I never could stand it. But that's okay. Like Pete Townsend always said, he said, that's okay. Leave him alone. Leave him alone. The guy's got a soldering iron and he makes it sound good and he can drive the truck. And I did.
Yeah.
It was always a fun thing. But I certainly didn't get into all their drug stuff, so whatever.
So I understand you made more than one trip to Hope.
Yeah, because we got together with Jeff Beck. And Jeff was in a rehearsal in England. We had a rehearsal hall over there that we'd set things up and make it happen. And Jeff was going to do this new band. And Jeff never had vocalist. He always played solo. He wasn't a vocal guy. But things were changing. The market was changing. And they were going to add this vocalist. And he was very concerned. I'm looking for something here. I'll find it. He was very concerned that he was going to not be able to hear Bobby Tench, his new vocal guy. And I said, no, because one of the reasons that we would get some of these contracts is we were the first guys to really do any kind of monitors. And I learned that from the Grateful Dead. We started playing with them. They wanted monitors. And I said, we can do that. And what I did is I took, we built little wedge type monitors so they'd be low profile. And we took 2 microphones and put it on the stand. The monitor microphone and system was out of phase from the front one, and it didn't feed back. Hello, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Learned all that from antennas. And people will say, well, what does antennas got to do with audio? It has everything to do with it. And I maintain, and I will not back down from this, I understand probably more about phasing than audio engineers do. And the reason I do is because of this kind of craziness. 1962, 128 element. They're 19 inches long. They're 40 feet in the air and 40 foot wide. They all had to be either in or out of phase, depending I wanted to do with it. Those are prop pitch motors from B-29, and I could turn this array to the moon, and I did moon bounce off the moon to a guy in Oklahoma. But phasing meant so much to ham radio. And that transmitter is all about phasing. It's a single sideband transmitter designed by Wes Shum, I learned so much about phasing. And when it come to audio, I'm going, whoa. And I was able to do things with this phasing, and that's where the monitor thing. Well, that word got out, and my gosh, here's this guy with these big Olsen bins and this big loud McIntosh truckload of McIntosh, and it would anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000 watts of power driving everything in the room, and it was all about phasing. Well, I wish I could I got to find a picture. It's a cool picture, and it meant a lot to what happened with Paul. We were at this rehearsal in London, and we were talking about all of the things that we were going to be doing for him. And I said, don't worry about the monitors. We're going to take care of that. He said, well, it's got to be loud, and I don't want these big speakers around me. I said, well, you got to have speakers around you. So we get back to America, and I go sit down with Paul. And I said, Paul, I need you to build me some speakers. What do you want? I said, I'd like to have some La Scalas. Yeah, I said, with 12-inch speakers. He comes jumping at me. Oh, you can't do it. What are you going to do? You're losing all the low end, da-di-da. He starts giving me all of the reasons I don't want to put 12-inch speakers in a La Scala. I don't know what I did with that picture. I got a great picture of Jeff and I. Anyway, he built them, but he really, really pushing me hard not to do this. But they were this tall, and I had these aimed right at in front of Jeff for that tour, and they were fabulous. I still have one of them.
Can you take a picture of it?
Huh?
Can you take a picture of it?
Uh-huh.
I'd love to have a picture of it.
I really, really wanted to put it in the Rock Hall display, but we didn't have room.
So Paul never did admit to you that he'd built 27 of these before you came and asked for it?
I didn't hear about that. That would have been about 72 or 3.
He had built one as early as 66.
I'll be darned. Yeah, he was just giving me all the sing-song about me. I was going to lose all the low end. Well, I knew that. 'Cause I didn't want any low end.
Right,
with
that's a good
monitors,
thing.
you roll that. Yeah.